Welcome back to episode 5 of Keeping It Juicy. This episode is brought to you by Simple Coffee, located in Mendham, New Jersey. They are located at 15 West Main Street in the center of town. The coffee shop is actually owned by a local woman. She actually worked there when she was young, and she recently purchased it. They have great coffee, great baked goods, and just great people working there. So I highly recommend that you stop by, and you can find them on Instagram at Simple Coffee Mendham, and I highly recommend that you follow them. So this is a part 2 of my cancer journey. So in the previous portion of this episode, I ended it by talking about Christmas Eve. I had a huge bruise. I was seeing family for the first time that I hadn't seen in a while, and people were acting like I had the Black Plague a little bit. And of course, it wasn't them. They just simply, you don't know how to react to somebody that has just been diagnosed with cancer. I was 28, I had a huge bruise on my arm from them prodding me with needles in order to get the chemotherapy in me. But at the end of the night, everyone was asking what they can do for me, and they were super helpful. And so now we're going to continue this conversation. And really the purpose of me sharing this is to educate people. If anyone is going through this right now, just know that you will get through this. And the number one thing that I would say to myself when I was going through it was, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. You're going to get through the day, the hour, the minute that you're going through, and it will pass. So the next part of this journey, and just to recap a little bit more, is I was treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I first went into New York City to be treated, and then I eventually went to Basking Ridge because the protocol is the same across all Memorial Sloan Ketterings, and there's one in Monmouth as well. And so I had my second treatment coming up. I had my first treatment on December 20th, and my second treatment, I believe it was every 2 weeks, so 2 weeks later. And my best friend, Hillary, who was Mr. Chester's cousin, came with me this time. And on the way there, I remember sitting in the passenger seat, and I remember the window was down a little bit, and I took my hand, and I put it through my hair, and then I took my hand, and there was actually hair in my hand. So the chemotherapy was working, which is great, but then I was going bald. And they do have something that's called, I forget what it's exactly called, but it's called like a freezing helmet or something, where you can actually freeze like your hair follicles so your hair will fall out less. So people who are really, don't want to lose their hair, they'll use that. I saw a girl using it, and it's very, very painful from what I hear, and you literally have to ice your whole head, and then you have to change it in between and ice it again because you really want to shrink those follicles. So I had the option, of course, to do that, but I actually chose not to do it because what other time in my life, and how many women have the chance to be bald or go through that, or I don't know. I just said, if I'm going to have cancer, I'm going to be bald, and I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to do it. So on the way to chemotherapy the second time in New York City, I texted Mr. Chester. He was at work, and I said, I need to shave my head tonight. Just make sure that we have great clippers or whatever it is. And he said, got it. Did chemotherapy, and, in and out. At that point, you're really just trying to survive your next big thing. So it's the chemotherapy. So you do chemo, you're tired for a few days, then you kind of really go back to the way that you were, and that's really how I felt. I said previously, chemo is really not what it used to be or what I imagined it used to be, and so I would go to chemotherapy. Maybe the next day, 2 days or 3 days, I was a little bit tired, and then I would really just go back to the way that I was. I worked the entire time. I did go down to hourly so that it was fair for my employer and for myself, where I could take time off, but I worked the entire time. I'm a registered dietitian by training, so I was still in that era of being an RD, working in long-term care. And so I finished my second chemotherapy. They actually started me on something called Ativan. So it's I don't know what it is exactly, but they said it would help with your nausea at home, but really it helped me sleep at night and helped with my anxiety. It's actually a pretty strong drug. And now that I look back, I'm a little bit surprised that they gave it to me. I'm not sure if they still do, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in my mental health journey, which will be coming up next. And so I went home. Mr. Chester had my favorite meal on the table, which is meatloaf and mashed potatoes. That would be my last meal if I died, which I talked about in the first episode. So I remember going inside. I remember sitting down. I was still a little bit out of it. I think I was just a little bit in shock that today was the day that I was going to shave my head. And I chose to shave my head because I wasn't going to go through every day agonizing with long pieces of hair falling out. So I wanted to take control of it myself. You have to take control of things that you can, especially during that journey. So we ate. I barely probably ate anything. We were kind of sitting there in silence, and then eventually I said, let's just go. Let's go upstairs. Let's do it. I took another Ativan. And so I was like kind of a little loopy, but you know what? I was going to be loopy when I'm doing this. And I actually took the scissors and I started to just chop my hair up. I just took some bangs, I chopped them, I just chopped all over the place, because why not? Again, you have to take every portion of your journey, if you're going through this right now, and make something of it. So I just started to chop my hair up. I have pictures of that. And so my bangs were like little tiny things, and Hillary was taking pictures. She was crying also. She was the only one who cried during this whole hair chopping thing and shaving of the head. So I actually started to shave my head first. So I just started to shave it. It was like very out of body experience. And then Hillary and Kim took turns and they finished shaving my head. And then next up was Kim. So he was actually balding, and he would wear his his sunglasses like right here, because he like wanted to hide that he was balding. So another silver lining, he had to shave his head, and he should have done it earlier, but he chose the day that I was shaving my head to do it. So Hillary and I both took turns shaving his head, because again, I was on a lot of Ativan, so I probably shouldn't have had a buzzer in my hand. We shaved his head. He looks amazing. He should have shaved his head a long time ago. And then we just took pictures. Hillary was just taking pictures of him and I with shaved heads. Having a relationship during this time, especially, shaving your head, and eventually I lost my breasts, it's definitely tough. But it's a good time to analyze your relationship or assess it, really. I think someone's either going to step up or step down, and Kim really stepped up. Men want to be wanted. So he really had a duty to take care of me, because I'm a pretty independent woman and I like to take care of myself, but this is a time where he was either going to do it or not, and he really did. So shaved our heads, and then we just kind of like kept going on with life. He never looked at me differently. And to be transparent, we had sex a few times during chemotherapy, but really it's, tough to get in that mode of sexy and sex, and he never said anything about it. I even said, do you want me to put a wig on? Do you want me to do something so it's a little bit more normal? And he said no. And, I just think that's super impressive. And again, we didn't have a lot of sex because, I was just trying to survive. So it's really where you get to test your relationship, and not in a great way, of course, but it definitely made us stronger. And we're not married, and a lot of people ask when we're getting married, why we're not married. And I think going through something like this is a test to your relationship, and I feel like we're already married. We've been through a lot for a couple who's been together for 10 years. And so having him by my side was something huge. I don't think I would have gotten through it as well as I did without him. And one of the things I remember is his family wanted to go bowling, and I just felt like bloated. When you go through chemotherapy, you have a lot of, you might go through constipation, which is gross. So they ask you to take Metamucil every day. So I was taking Metamucil, but one day I just felt so gross, and I was wearing a wig, and I was like, just go without me, like really just go without me. And he would not leave the house without me. He just would not leave the house, and I just kept going, go, 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 I feel gross. I was crying, and he just said, you'll feel better. And you know what? For the beginning of bowling, I was like super angry at him for making me go, and by the end, I turned it around, and I said, thank you for making me go, and I apologize for acting like that, but you're going to have somebody strong with you in order to get through it. So it's a good way to assess your relationship. So when you're going through chemotherapy, if it's hard for them to find a vein, they usually recommend a port. So immediately after having, getting that bruise and them taking a long time to find a vein to put chemo in, I couldn't keep going through that. So I did eventually get a port, which I have the port scar here. And getting the port was actually one of the most traumatic experiences, which is kind of crazy when I look back. But the day I got my port, we took the train in. I don't know why we did that. We took the train in, and I had to go to a surgery center in New York City. So just FYI, what a port is, I don't know the terminology exactly. It's something they put under your skin and they attach it to the veins so they can really just pop something on there and give you the chemotherapy rather than trying to find a vein all the time. So when I was getting my port, we were in New York City. It was a little bit of a hullabaloo because it was a mini surgery. So they put me in a bed. I was 28 years old. I was laying back in the bed, and they rolled me in backwards into a room. And in the room, there was a TV that said, Caitlin O'Neill, 28 years old, female. And I read that, and I just started having a panic attack, essentially. I said, why am I here? I'm 28 years old. I shouldn't be here right now. And I think the guy who was there, I remember he was kind of like, oh, God, this girl's freaking out a little bit. And he was just like, it's okay. And I was just hysterically crying. And I said, it's not okay. I'm 28 years old. What am I doing here? And eventually they just put a little bit of drugs in me. So I calmed down. And that, I believe a lot of time with that type of surgery, I forget what it's called, but you're not fully knocked out. You're just kind of sedated. But it's like you're coming in and out of it. Because it's a really quick thing. It takes, I think, maybe less than 10 minutes. And so I started to calm down, obviously. They put the port in, and then I rolled out, and what was next was time to walk to Memorial Sloan Kettering, the cancer center, to get chemotherapy, which is just, it was just such a long day. But I was really thankful to get that port so that I didn't have to be poked and prodded all the time. So I just kept getting chemotherapy, kept getting blood work done, kept checking everything. I do remember one time I did have a full-on panic attack, which I highly recommend if you're sick or someone you know is sick, do not go to Google, because I went to Google and it said the mortality rate for my specific kind of cancer was like 90%. And so my dad had to call someone at Memorial Sloan Kettering, his friend, and ask him if it was accurate, and I just had a full-on panic attack. So don't do that, just FYI, because you don't know what you're going to find and you don't know how to analyze it unless you're a doctor yourself. So I eventually moved from New York City to Memorial Sloan Kettering. I finished up my chemotherapy on May 2nd, 2017. My dad and Mr. Chester were there with me. I remember I was wearing my red Rutgers hat, and then I just went home and took a nap, and it was over. For my specific cancer, HER2-positive breast cancer, you do IV therapy for a year. So there's a lot of things like tamoxifen, you might know, which is an oral medication that people take with certain different kinds of cancers. So I did IV therapy. So I was actually still going back to Memorial Sloan Kettering for one entire year, getting IV therapy of Herceptin every 3 weeks. And it's not a chemotherapy, so my hair wasn't falling out, anything like that. I didn't talk about my wigs, actually. So I did get wigs, which I do miss, and which my hair is red because of one of my wigs was red. So it inspired me to dye my hair red. So I got 2 wigs. One was real hair, and it was expensive. And I was very lucky that my father and my mother, were financially stable. And so I really didn't have to worry about anything with finances, just to be transparent. So I put everything on my dad's credit card, including my wigs. And I had one really nice wig that was really my hair, which was brown at the time, or before I shaved it. And then I got a red wig, which was like synthetic. It was $300, and that's the one I wore most often and what I loved. So it has inspired me to get my red hair. And I eventually gave my wigs to someone in need. Again, they are very expensive. They can be thousands and thousands of dollars. So I found somebody who, needed wigs, and so I shipped them to her. And I hope she passed them on to somebody else. So after chemotherapy, you'd think the journey is over, and nah, the journey has not even begun at that point. Chemotherapy is interesting because you really just are in a bubble of survival. So you go to chemo, you get tired, and then you prep for the next chemo. You go to chemo, you get tired, you prep for the next one, and you just keep going. So those 16 chemotherapies, which was over a few months, was done. And so the next step was to see how the cancer reacted to the chemo, and it fully reacted, and it was fully, completely, I forget what word they used, but the chemotherapy had killed all of the cancer. And you might think, well, then why would you have to get a mastectomy? So the cancer can just rebuild and come back. So it was good that they killed the cancer, but we wanted to take everything out so it wouldn't come back. So at that point, I had to, rest about a month or two, I believe, or maybe it was 6 months, but I don't think it was that long. No, I think it was a month. I think I finished in May, and then I think I had surgery June 7th, and I had a double mastectomy. So I had both of my breasts taken off, and because my cancer was so aggressive, HER2 positive, and my entire breast was full of cancer. My whole right breast was cancer, and all of my lymph nodes were cancer. So I caught my cancer really just in time before it spread. So stage 3, and then stage 4 is when it spread somewhere else. There was no cancer on my left side, so they had to do a double mastectomy where they removed all of my breasts, all of the lymph nodes in my right arm, and my nipples as well, because you can still, remove the cancer in your breast, but your nipples are part of that, so you can still get cancer there. Some people keep it, and I'm not, I don't want to scare anybody. Don't, if you had cancer and you kept your nipples and you have questions, please just go to your doctor. And so one of the things I fully remember is before I was rolled into the surgical room, I woke up from the meds and I was like, don't forget to weigh my boobs. I really want to know how much they weigh. And each of them were 2.5 pounds. I'm telling you, my boobs were huge. So that's, interesting information. And it was just a surreal experience again. I was laying in the bed and I was getting ready to get my boobs taken off. And Mr. Chaucer's a boob guy, and I was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Although I really didn't think about our relationship because I was just trying to survive. Again, you're trying to survive. And if I was thinking about my relationship that much and the fear that I was going to lose my relationship, then they can go walk on by themselves. Then you don't need them, and you have other family and friends. So I got my breast taken off, and I remember I was in the aftercare room, and I was scared shitless to look. Because imagine getting your breast taken off. I can't imagine even doing it now. Thinking back at it, it's really crazy. And I looked down, and I was hysterically crying, and I was like, oh, it's actually not that bad. And, silver lining, if you're going through this, or you have your prophylactic surgery coming up, or you have your surgery after chemo coming up, it's not a bad life. Again, I don't wear a bra very often. I don't have nipples. I wear see-through things. It's kind of amazing. So again, a silver lining. You have to look at the silver linings to everything that's going on. And in one of my episodes previously, I talked about how I tested positive for the BRCA gene. And I want to make sure that it's clear on why I tested positive the second time. So I was tested for my mother's specific strand of the BRCA gene when I was 17 years old. So insurance, I'm sure, will only just cover that one strand in those 26 strands in your DNA. So I tested negative for my mom's strand. And when I got breast cancer, they were like, what the hell is going on? This 28-year-old girl. So I got all of the genetic testing done, and I tested positive, and we're like, what happened? And at first I was like, oh shit, now we can sue and be millionaires, and we can just go off into the sunset because they messed up my first test. But my dad got tested, and he's BRCA positive, and he has a different strand, and I tested positive for my father's. So I had some questions on the first round when I was talking about that. I didn't test negative the first time and test positive the second time because of any mistakes or because you can change. It's because I didn't inherit my mother's gene, I inherited my father's gene. So I wanted to make sure that's super clear. If you have any questions about that, please talk to your doctor, genetic counseling, anything like that. So I had my breasts taken off. I did take 5 weeks off from work, which is pretty unheard of. I probably should have taken 6, but again, I'm addicted to work. And then the next part of the phase was going through radiation. So I had radiation on my right breast for 30 days straight. And to be honest with you, that was one of the hardest 30 days in the whole cancer journey that I had, because I had to go there every single day, Monday through Friday, to lay down and have them burn my skin, essentially. And during that time, they do tell you not to talk to anybody or try not to talk to anybody in the waiting room. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because I was talking to a woman in there who was getting radiation because she had already gotten radiation therapy from breast cancer, but now she had lung cancer, and she thinks it was because of her radiation. So of course I had a panic attack one day. I went in there, I laid down, and I started hysterically crying, and I had to sit up because I couldn't breathe. And you have to stay very still during radiation because they obviously don't want to radiate anywhere that shouldn't be. And I actually have 7 tattoos on my body because they tattoo your body to make sure they radiate you in the right places. So I had a panic attack, and they said, do you want to do this tomorrow? And I said, no, let's just do it. So I calmed down, and then I talked to the doctor, and she said she had to explain everything to me. But I really felt like at that point that I was giving myself a different type of cancer by doing radiation. So it's all just a mind fuck, to be honest with you. I finished radiation, and then eventually I had to heal from that. So my breast was totally burnt, and the skin was peeling, everything. And then that healed fairly quickly. And then I had to get surgery to put in my breast implants. And after my first surgery, you actually have, like tubes coming out of your body because you're making a lot of fluid in order to heal. I don't know how I did all this now that I'm thinking back at it, but I had 4 tubes coming out of my body, and fluid was coming out, and it was red, and it was bloody, and we had to change it and empty it. How did we do this? And this is just goes to show you what you can do as a human and what your body can go through, and you can heal. So I had to do that. Then they took the tubes out, and they were stretching out my skin too. So I would go to the doctor because I had spacers in. I would go to the doctor every week. They would stick a needle right into my breast, and they would pump it up, and my boob would grow to stretch the skin. It was so fucking weird. I can't believe I did all this. Eventually, I had the exchange surgery where they put in breast implants, so I have breast implants in now. And at that time, I also had 2 large benign tumors around one ovary. So at that time, they went in to see if they could take them out. They took them out, and I had to lose one ovary as well. So I have 1 ovary and 2 fake breasts with no nipples, but I'm still a lady after all. And so I had the exchange surgery. That went really well. Everything went well, and then after that, it was kind of like, okay, well, we'll see you in your follow-ups. And to be honest with you, that was one of the hardest times, if not the hardest time, was the transition from being the center of attention at, going to the doctor, going to the oncologist, to getting everything done, and then now you're kind of transitioning back into the real world and getting back to life and going to your primary care physician. I remember being sick one day and having a cold, and my PCP wouldn't see me because I was just too fresh off of chemo, and the oncologist, I couldn't really you don't just get an appointment there. And so I had to call them crying and say, no one will talk to me, no one will see me, and I feel sick, I can't do this. And I actually realized that I was in a major depression at that point, because transitioning back into the real world where you don't have, chemotherapy, chemo survive, you have, those tracks that you're going on to survive. So if anybody that you know is going through chemo, please just make sure to check in on them when they're kind of transitioning back into real world, because that's actually pretty tough. And that was 7 years ago, and here I am today. I barely cut my hair because it's obviously so long, and I was bald at one point, I had wigs at one point, and I just, the real message here and what I want to share with all you guys is that you're going to get through this. If you're going through it yourself, this too shall pass. If you were just diagnosed, this too shall pass. If you just finished treatment, you're alive, you're well. And if you have been diagnosed with stage 1, 2, 3, or 4 cancer, stage 4 cancer isn't what it used to be. There's so many treatments out there. I had stage 3 cancer. I felt very lucky, but there's just so much out there. And every single day, there's new data coming out. So even in a year or two, something may change, and stage 4 cancer may just be stage 1 cancer. Everything is changing in the medical field. And so this is why we should donate to reputable sources with cancer research. And I just want, you to know that you're not alone. And I know from my mother being sick as well, she had multiple bouts of cancer, which I'll talk about in another episode. Being on the outside is sometimes even harder than being on the inside because you feel a little bit hopeless. But if you're on the outside, if you're a family member, just be there to support somebody, ask them what they need, and just check in on them. So again, if you're going through this, you're going to be okay. Life will go on, and sometimes you just have to remember that this is the journey that you're supposed to go on. Thank you for listening to this episode of Keeping It Juicy. You can find this episode and all the rest on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And as always, don't forget, keep it juicy.